please state your full name and spell your last name?
It's Ronald L. Wruck, and it's W-R-U-C-K.
And how are you employed, Mr. Wruck?
I am branch manager, senior vice president with Steeple Nicholas in Kimberly, Wisconsin.
And how long have you been working at the Steeple Nicholas Appleton branch?
Let's see, started in 98, October 1st of 98.
I'm sorry, Mr. Wruck, could you please move the microphone a little closer to you?
Sorry. October 1st of 98 is when I started.
And at that time, who else was working at Steeple Nicholas in Appleton?
Edward Klug, Stacy Bowers, Bonnie LeClaire, and Joan Colby.
I'm sorry.
Joan Colby.
And at that time, what was Mr. Klug's position in the Appleton office?
The same. Actually, at that time, we didn't have our branch manager's license yet. So it was just senior vice president, same as myself.
Okay. Are you now co-managers of that branch?
Yes, we are.
Prior to that, where were you employed?
At Robert W. Baird.
And how long were you employed there?
Let's see. 1993, I believe I started there.
And what was your position there?
I was senior vice president of investments.
Did you work with Ed Klug there also?
Yes, I did.
Okay. In November of 1998, did you attend a conference in St. Louis for Steeple Nicholas?
Yes, I did.
And do you recall who else from your office attended that conference?
It was just Ed and I.
And do you recall when that conference was?
The exact time of the month, I'm not quite sure.
Okay. Can you tell us a little bit about what occurs at that conference?
It's basically an annual meeting. It's to build up, company repertoire, meet other brokers, but mainly to fulfill continuing education requirements that we have to do for the state and the NESD. Also to just learn more about the firm, get firm updates. Usually we have a branch managers meeting. It's an annual event, and that was the first one we attended.
Okay. On Friday night of that conference, is there a dinner that all the attendees go to?
Generally, I can't recall exactly if we had one that night. I would assume we did.
Okay. Do you recall whether Mark Jensen was also at that conference?
Yes, he was.
Do you recall what you did that night, that Friday night of the conference?
I can't recall exactly what was said. I remember that I made friends with two new brokers there that came from Ohio, Kurt Schlemitz, and I don't know how to spell that exactly, but, and another fellow whose name was Jeffers, Steve Jeffers, from Ohio, and they had started about the same time we did. And I kind of made friends with them. I know I was talking to them in the bar after our meal or our meeting.
Okay. And do you recall whether in the bar after your meeting, was Mark Jensen present there also?
I believe he was.
And was Ed Klug also present?
Yes.
And how long did you stay out that evening?
I stayed out until they closed down, and that was, I would say 2:30, somewhere in there. I don't know where St. Louis closes their bars or that particular establishment, but it was somewhere in that area.
And this bar that you're at, was that located within the hotel that you were staying in?
Yes.
Okay. Did you notice that evening whether Mr. Klug had been drinking alcohol?
Yes, he was.
And did you notice whether Mr. Jensen had been drinking alcohol?
I wasn't sure. I did not talk too much to Mark that night. I remember seeing him by the bar a couple times, but I don't know what he was drinking.
Okay. At the time that you were leaving the bar because it was shutting down, did you see who had remained behind?
Well, I think we all left the bar at about the same time.
And where did you go?
There was,
Now there's three of us. Okay.
there was probably, I would say, 20 to 25 people in the bar. Probably half or better were from the Stiefel Nicholas group. Others were probably people that were staying in the hotel.
Okay. And from the bar, where did you go?
We went out into the lobby, and there was some brief conversation about what people were going to do. And I went, in fact, I think I told Ed I'm going to my room, and I took the elevator and went up to my room.
So you told Mr. Klug you were going to your room?
Yes.
And what was Mr. Klug going to do, if he told you?
He didn't really tell me.
Okay. At the time that you went up to your room, though, Mr. Klug was still in the lobby?
Yes, he was.
And was Mr. Jensen still in the lobby?
That I can recall, yes.
Okay. Did you see Mr. Klug then the next morning, or that same morning?
Yes.
And where did you see him?
I seen him, I was actually shaving in my room, and there was a knock on the door. And he was at the door. And I noticed he was kind of raggy. His tie was off center, and he didn't look like he was ready for the meeting in the morning, which we had at like a breakfast and then a meeting. And I said, "What have you been doing?" He says, "Well, I've been up all night." I says, "Really?" He says, "Yeah, me and Mark were up planning how to kill our wives." And then he laughed, and I laughed, and I thought it was a joke.
Okay.
You know, I thought it was just a joke because he had a history of talking that way, you know, about his wife, and you know, they've been having some problems.
I'm sorry, what was
They had been having some problems, and he had a kind of a history of talking that way. So I kind of blew it off. I didn't think much of it.
Did he have a history of talking about ways to kill his wife?
Not that I know of, not that in
Okay.
particular, but he, you know, derogatory comments.
So when he came to your room, well, what time was it approximately that he came to your room?
I would say probably 7 o'clock a.m.
Okay. And he said he and Mark had been discussing ways to kill their wives?
Right.
And he was referring to Mark who?
Mark Jensen.
Okay. Did you talk about this again with him?
As far as what time frame, I guess.
At any time during the rest of that conference?
Not during the conference that I can recollect. I did have a conversation with him on the plane. He sat next to me on the plane.
This is on the plane back?
Coming home from St. Louis back to Appleton.
Okay, from that same conference?
Yes.
And tell me what you remember from that conversation.
I remember him mentioning again that the first comment came up that Mark has got a wife kind of like my wife. I don't know what word he used. It could have been she's crazy or psycho or something like that is what he used as far as a word. And he said she's trying to kill herself with Benadryl, or trying to, I shouldn't say that, she's depressed and she's taking a lot of Benadryl. And that's what he had said to me.
Okay. And was he saying other things that you don't remember? Or was it just a very small, short, 2-minute conversation?
Well, he mentioned it on the plane, and I don't recollect it being a long conversation. He just said I remember him talking about Benadryl, and that she was taking it and she was depressed and he was concerned about her well-being. That was the conversation in that context. I vaguely, and I don't know this for sure, but I do vaguely remember him saying something about looking something up on a computer. As far as anything else, that's all I can recollect.
Okay. As far as that memory that you have about looking something up on the computer, was Ed saying that Mr. Jensen was looking things up on the computer?
I can't say that for sure.
Okay. Did he use the word computer, or did he use the word internet? or both?
I remember computer.
Okay. At some point, well, when you got back to the office then, did Ed talk about this conversation with Mark, with Mr. Jensen, prior to you hearing about Mrs. Jensen's death?
He might have. I don't recollect any conversation between the time of our plain conversation and her death to any great length. It could have happened, but I cannot remember anything in particular. There could have been something. Again, I don't remember.
Do you have vague memories of what conversations at that time?
Objection, you didn't state that there were any conversations.
The objection is sustained.
Well, after after you found out, strike that. Did you then find out that Mrs. Jensen had died?
Yes, I found out when it was announced, yes.
Okay. And do you recall approximately when it was announced?
I think it was like the end of the year, December, somewhere in there of that same year.
And at the time that the announcement was made that Mrs. Jensen had died, did you hear Mr. Klug mention anything else about conversations with Mark Jensen or what he might know about?
Well, he had conversations with Mark, whether it be business conversations with with day-to-day business, and or personal conversations. I mean, I wasn't really privy to that.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Mr. Wruck, I think I know where Mr. Wruck's going, and it would be a it would be a hearsay statement, yes.
Well, he stopped.
Yeah, no,
He stopped wherever he was going, so ask another question if you would, please.
Okay. Did you have conversations with Mr. Klug about the circumstances of Mrs. Jensen's death upon hearing that she had died?
I don't recollect any specific conversations, but I know he had said some things or speculated some things to me. I remember one conversation in particular where he came into my room, in my office, I should say, from his office, and he had said that he had been talking to Mark, and I don't know who brought it up, but his suspicion was, this was Ed's suspicion, that something was up because the insurance company had not paid his insurance claim. And that's really my only recollection of any conversation between the time of death and the prosecution date.
Okay.
There probably was some vague conversations or speculations by people in the office, but I don't recollect them.
Well, was the speculation in the office based on things that Mr. Klug was saying?
I object to repeating office speculation.
Sustained.
What comments, if any, can you remember Mr. Klug making about the circumstances of Mrs. Jensen's death before Mr. Jensen was charged?
I can't remember exactly if there was any comments made before then.
Okay.
There might have been something, but I can't remember.
Okay. At some point, did you become aware that Mr. Jensen had been charged in the death of his wife?
Yes.
And how did you become aware of that?
I believe Mr. Klug came out of his office and said something. Also, I talked to a friend of mine, Dan Ixner, in the Racine office. And he had called me up, and I think he told me how to get to the website to print out the arrest document. And then we printed it up. And I know I read some of it that day.
And did you and Mr. Klug have a conversation about that criminal complaint?
Yes, we did.
And where were you when you had this complaint? I mean, this conversation?
Well, I actually came out of my office, and it was, Ed was out of his office, and we were in the middle of the common area where all the ladies worked. And because, we worked together and we're kind of kid each other once in a while, I said to him, maybe you know something about this. You better call somebody. And I said, call somebody. And, he kind of looked at me kind of funny, like, you're just trying to make something out of it. And I didn't think nothing of it at the time. I just thought, in light of the situation at the time, that he might be involved in something, because, it's nothing to be of light of, I understand. But at the time, that's the way it sounded. I mean, it didn't sound like there was anybody, worried about it. They were just talking about it. It was
So, Mr. Wruck, when you kidded around or made light of this with Mr. Wruck, with Mr. Klug, that maybe he had something to do with it, what were you referring to?
with the death of Julie.
And what prompted you to say that?
Because of the conversation that he had with me on the plane. Because then I thought, well, maybe possibly something, but I didn't really believe it. At the time it came out, I didn't believe it. So, I just prompted him, and then he did contact a friend of ours, Quinn Yorton, who runs our Green Bay branch.
Object to this hearsay from this point.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
Well, so you suggested that he contact someone about.
Objection.
Did you suggest to him that he contact someone about what he might know regarding Mrs. Jensen's death?
Yes.
Okay. And do you know whether he did that?
I know he contacted Quinn Yorton. I do not, he had told me he contacted the DA's office.
Okay.
I don't know if he did for sure, but he told me that.
Okay. And when did he tell you that?
The same day.
Okay. And was it the same day that he contacted Quinn Yorton?
Yes.
And who is Quinn Yorton?
He is our branch manager in the Green Bay office.
And why, if you know, why would Mr. Klug contact Quinn Yorton?
I believe Quinn had some background in legal investigation,
Okay.
and that would be the reason.
Now, at the time that you were standing out in the main office area saying maybe you had something to do with this, or if you know something, who else was present, if you recall?
Bonnie LeClaire was present. I believe Joan Colby was present. I know Stacy Douglas was present. At the time, I'm not sure if Todd and Tim were out there at all. I'm not sure if they were out in their offices.
Okay, so Stacy Bauer was present and Joan Colby?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And did any of those women express any surprise that you would suggest to Mr. Klug that he should contact someone about what he might know regarding Julie Jensen's death?
Objection, hearsay.
No, he's a personal witness to whether anybody expressed surprise, and the fact those people would not be declarants because they're not making an assertion of fact. So the objection's overruled. Although it's something to be careful about exactly how it is developed.
You can answer the question.
Could you repeat it, please?
The relevance, too, as to what their frame of mind is.
Well-
It's not Mr. Klug.
The objection's overruled.
Mr. Wruck, do you remember the question?
Could you repeat it, please?
I'll ask the reporter to read it back.
question. And did any of those women express any surprise that you would suggest to Mr. Klug that he should contact someone about what he might know regarding Julie Jensen's death?
Yes.
And who?
Had the same objections.
I think they all did. They all seemed surprised. I think everybody was a little surprised
Surprised over what?
in that.
Objection calls for speculation.
If you know.
Well, why don't you rephrase your question a little bit?
I don't know how to rephrase that. Were the women who were present for this conversation, were they surprised that Mark Jensen had been arrested?
Yes.
And were they surprised that he had been charged?
Yes.
Were they surprised that Mr. Klug might have some knowledge about how Julie Jensen died?
Definitely.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear
I
that.
thought you said definitely.
Definitely, yes.
At some point, did Mr. Klug mention to you the words antifreeze or ethylene glycol?
When are you talking about?
Well, at any point.
Yes, he did.
Okay, and do you recall when?
No.
Do you recall whether he talked to you about antifreeze or ethylene glycol prior to Mark Jensen's arrest?
No, I do not.
Okay. I have nothing further.
Mr. Albee?
Mr. Wruck, let's just start with that Friday evening. We've had testimony that it was November 6th and the Saturday morning was November 7th, okay?
Yes.
And you observed Mr. Klug drinking in the bar?
Yes, I did.
Do you recall if you had dinner with Mr. Klug?
I know we all had dinner together. I can't remember if we sat together that night. I'm not sure. I can't
It
recall.
was a big dinner,
Right.
and you don't recall
No, I don't
what
remember.
happened there?
We go to a lot of different dinners, and there's speakers at a lot of them, and we sit by different people all the time.
Okay. And do you have any recollection of whether Mr. Klug was intoxicated that night?
I couldn't speculate as to whether he was or he wasn't.
Did he appear hungover at 7 a.m. the next morning?
I couldn't speculate as to that either.
And was he present with you when you met these new acquaintances, these Ohio brokers?
Yes.
And he was meeting them and socializing with them
Yes.
and with you?
Yes.
The next morning, you indicated that Ed Klug said something along the lines of, we stayed up talking about ways to kill our wives, right?
Pretty much just a straight statement like that and a chuckle.
And you chuckled,
Right.
not because you thought it was particularly funny, but just to
No.
be kind.
Right.
And this was not, as you said, an unusual kind of thing for Mr. Klug to say, right?
No.
And
No, that's not right, or no, this was not unusual?
No, this was not unusual.
thank you, Judge. And this wasn't unusual because he frequently made disparaging remarks about his wife, right?
Yes.
And you wouldn't be surprised if at other times he said something like about getting rid of her or doing something to her or something like that.
In those vague kind of ways, yes.
And his statement about killing our wives didn't even make much of an impression on you. You thought it was a joke.
At the time, I thought it was a joke. Yes, I did.
And fair to say Mr. Klug and his wife had a contentious relationship at the time?
It would be fair to say that, yes.
And how were you aware of that contentiousness?
Well, I'd spent time with Ed. We had prospected together. We went to different chamber events. We went out when wholesalers came to town, which are mutual fund wholesalers, annuity wholesalers, and they wanted you to look at their product. They would take us out for dinner, where we'd go out and prospect for new clients. There would be calls, telephone calls, back and forth, continuously. That happened over a number of years.
Telephone calls back and forth where they were fighting with each other?
Objection, calls for speculation.
Sustained.
Well, you could hear sometimes you could hear Mr. Klug's end of the conversation, right?
Yes,
And he'd be arguing with his wife, right?
yes,
Trying to pacify her, right?
correct.
You'd hear him make accusations against her.
Objection. I don't see the relevance of this. Question.
Overruled.
That means you can answer. So you... and
Repeat that, please.
Yes, you'd hear Mr. Klug make accusations or remarks to his wife as well, right?
Yes.
And you got a little bit more information from you got a little information from Mr. Klug on the plane the next day, right?
Yes,
He simply said Mark's wife was depressed, correct?
yes,
And that she was taking Benadryl,
correct.
excessive amounts maybe?
Yes,
And you had said something like taking a lot of Benadryl, something about trying to kill herself, and then you said, no, that's not right, and you stated it a different way. I take it that that's not something that was said, correct?
well, I can't recall if that was said, whether trying to kill his wife. What I thought I heard him say, I shouldn't say, he did say something about she might be trying to kill herself with Benadryl, and he was concerned about it.
And that she was very depressed.
Yes,
And you said something like you vaguely remember something about a computer. I take it you're not absolutely positive that there was a conversation about a computer that day.
I'm not 100% sure.
Now, you were aware of Mr. Klug on July 30th, 2007, testifying in this case,
I was aware of it, yes.
and what was Mr. Klug's reaction to the publicity about the case when he returned to Appleton?
Well, he just said that the family,
Let me try to put it a different way. Did Mr. Klug enjoy the publicity?
Objection as to the relevance. And it calls for speculation.
Sustained.
Well, you saw Mr. Klug told you his reaction to the publicity, right?
Objection, calls for hearsay.
It would be an exception in the hearsay rule. Overruled.
Mr. Klug told you his reaction to the publicity?
Yes.
Right? You saw him talking to other people about the publicity?
yes.
Right? He seemed to be enjoying the publicity?
At the time, yes.
And would it be fair to say that Mr. Klug is somewhat of an attention seeker?
Define attention seeker.
Did you believe that the publicity was sort of an ego stroke for Mr. Klug?
Objection as to the relevance of what he believed.
Based on your observations of Mr. Klug?
The objection's overruled.
Yeah, it means you
Please
can answer.
repeat, okay.
Yes. Based on your observations of Mr. Klug after all the publicity surrounding his testimony, did you think that was something of an ego boost for Mr. Klug?
It seemed to be at the time, yes.
And you've worked with Mr. Klug for how long now?
Well, I met him when we worked at Jones back in 1989. So I've known him since then. We worked at Jones together, we worked at Baird together, we worked at Steeple together.
So you're closing in on 20 years?
Pretty close, yeah.
And I know this may be difficult for you, Mr. Wruck, but after that time, do you have an opinion as to Mr. Klug's character for truthfulness?
I think he's truthful to his clients. I think he's, in general, a truthful human being. I've had personal situations in business where
No, you can just give your opinion, sir.
Do personal situations weigh into your opinion as to his character for honesty?
Objection, Your Honor. He answered the question.
Well, the objection's overall.
Personal experiences, I presume, would weigh into your opinion for his character for truthfulness?
basically,
Objection, Your Honor.
because we worked together quite a bit and...
Your Honor.
What's the objection?
The objection is that it's calling, he answered the question, and I don't think there should be inquiry beyond this point.
No, overall.
There's been instances, that I've had with him in business where he hasn't been totally truthful to me. And I guess there's things that he's done I wouldn't do, put it that way.
In 2002, after Mr. Jensen was charged, you indicated that you printed up the complaint,
Yes,
and you and Mr. Klug read that complaint.
I think we both printed it up. I took a copy home. I don't believe I might have read it all at one point, but probably at a later date, probably a week later or 3-4 days later.
And you both, you had a chance then to talk about the allegations therein, right?
Possibly off and on.
And you talked about the fact that the prosecutor was accusing Mr. Jensen of poisoning his wife with antifreeze, right?
Correct.
And so that would have been a reason for you and Mr. Klug to talk about antifreeze or ethylene glycol at that time, true?
Well, I know we talked about it at that time.
And because that was an allegation in the complaint.
Right. It could have been before that, but again, I don't know.
And you have no distinct recollection of ever talking about it before that time, true?
I'd have to say true.
Mr. Klug, when Mr. Jensen was charged, thought that was odd, right?
Mr. Klug thought it was odd? Are you
Yes.
asking me? I think he was surprised. Yes. He seemed surprised.
And when you were suggesting you talk to Quinn Yorton, you were sort of ribbing him, right?
At the time, yes.
And you were ribbing him because you really didn't think he had anything of any significance, right?
At the time, yes.
And that was based on all the information he had told you at that time, correct?
Correct.
And other than in response to the publicity in this case, have there been other times when you felt that Mr. Klug was an intention getter?
There have been times I thought he was trying to boost his ego, yes.
And he was what?
Trying to boost his ego.
I still didn't hear you.
Trying to boost his ego or bring attention to himself, yes. That's kind of, that's kind of his nature. I mean, a lot of salesmen are like that.
That's all I have. Thank you, Mr. Wruck.
Mr. Wruck, Mr. Albee asked you about Ed Klug's nature, and you said that it was in his nature to kind of seek attention. Is it also in his nature that people confide in him?
I couldn't answer that.
Okay. Does he seem to have a way of finding the gossip or finding the story?
I would say that is true.
So people tend to tell him things that they might not tell someone else?
The objection is sustained.
What do you base that opinion on?
Just knowing him a long time. I mean, and I think a lot of it is, part of our job is to try to know things about people and get background information, so he's very good at it.
So he's good at
Leading.
Sustained. A leading question is one which suggests an answer, and they're not generally admissible on a direct examination of witness or redirect. Go ahead.
Okay. You've testified that Mr. Klug does things differently than perhaps you would do them. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Is one of the things that he does differently that he's able to get people to confide in him?
Asked and answered. And I don't think that was the subject of the previous question.
Go ahead and answer.
I can't answer that truthfully.
Okay. Now, considering your differences, if you had been told in November of 1998,
Objection.
Sustained.
you testified that Mr. Klug on the plane talked to you about Julie Jensen and Benadryl, correct?
Correct.
And did Mr. Klug give you the impression that he believed there was ethylene glycol present in Benadryl?
Objection. He said that he didn't recall any statement about ethylene glycol.
The objection is overruled.
Not at that time.
Not at that time,
No.
but did he at some point prior to his testimony in July of 2007?
Yes.
And do you have a specific memory of when that occurred?
No, I know we talked about it. Again, I don't know when it was. There was more than one conversation about that. And I had been a mechanic years ago, and I knew what ethylene glycol was. I didn't know if it was present in Benadryl or if it wasn't. I'm not an expert in that matter, but we talked about that, saying, and I said, well, that could poison someone, most definitely. And I don't know if it was even in the report, but I remember talking about it with him.
Okay. State has nothing further.
That conversation would have been after Mr. Jensen was charged, right?
That's all I can remember for being positive. I don't know if it was before, it could have been, but I don't remember that.
Well, and after the complaint came out, you were aware of a reason to talk about the ethylene glycol and the antifreeze, right?
Yes.
And Mr. Klug was engaging in a lot of speculation about what might have happened, right?
I don't know that.
He didn't engage in that speculation with you?
Oh, he engaged in speculation with me after it came out, yes.
Speculating about how this might have happened or that might have happened in terms of Julie Jensen's death, right?
Correct.
And did I understand one of your answers on redirect correct, that it would be fair to characterize Mr. Klug as something of a gossip?
I don't know if I said that.
Would that be fair to say?
Objection, Your Honor. What's the relevance of that?
Overall.
That means you can answer.
A lot more than I would be gossiping about something, yes, I think.
That's all. Thank you, Mr. Wruck.
Any question?
I do have a question, actually. Mr. Albee asked you about Mr. Klug speculating regarding Mrs. Jensen's death. Before the complaint was issued against Mr. Jensen, was Ed speculating that perhaps Mark Jensen had killed his wife?
I think he was speculating about that for quite some time.
But before the complaint came out, correct?
Yes, yes.
And was his, to your knowledge, what was his speculation based on the conversation?
Well, just so it's clear, when you say was he speculating, are you saying was he expressing speculative thoughts?
Yes, I'm sorry, Your Honor. Was he expressing, was he making statements that perhaps Mark Jensen had murdered his wife prior to the complaint being issued against Mr. Jensen?
Yes, he speculated about that before that.
And did he express to you that he was thinking this, that Mark Jensen might have killed his wife because of the conversation he and Mark Jensen had at the Blueprint in St. Louis in November?
Like I said, I can't remember any specific things on the time frame, but I know he was speculating about those things. He was speculating about the insurance money. I remember that in particular because he came into my office one night when we were working later and brought that up, and that was before he was charged.
Thank you, nothing further.
And that was Mr. Klug's speculation, just what he was thinking in his own mind, right?
I assume so, yes.
And he didn't say, and you had indicated that after Mark here was charged, he seemed surprised, right?
On the date that we got that, yes.
That's all.
Any questions?
No, Your Honor.
You may step down, sir. Let's take the usual break.